Okay, the next speak out will be by Gideon Kunda, who flew in from Tel Aviv. He will speak in English. Is there anyone in the room who needs translation to German to be able to follow his talk? No? Okay, perfect.
And I know, actually we know each other from Israel. I visited you and your initiative at the old central bus station in Tel Aviv, where you founded a community education center. And about this founding experience and how you came up with an idea as one of the initiator, you will speak. And it's very, very nice to have you here, Gideon. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. You don't have to.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. I've tried to follow the discussion so far in German with only partial success. But what I was able to pick up is the centrality of the question of immigration, refugees, the impact of refugees and immigrants entering society. Now, this is a common problem. It didn't start today. Germany is in the news around these issues in a very interesting way. It's a social problem, it's a political problem, it's not a problem, it's an opportunity. But among other things, I agree with the previous speaker that it's a profound opportunity to investigate our own society. The way we treat outsiders, the way we work on integration or rejection is an opportunity to explore the deep structures of our own society and to try and work with them. Unlike the previous speaker, Fahid, I would like to present a bottoms-up approach. I understand the constitutional approach, the effort to legislate from above. It's a very important one, and I believed that in the past. Unfortunately, I come from a society where there is no constitution, or from a region where constitutional law is very weak. And the realities are determined on the ground. The constitutional law is just a weak reflection of what goes on the ground. It's okay? Okay. As I was introduced, I come from a city called Tel Aviv, Yafo in Israel. Huge differences between here, but also some similarities. I'd like to use my experience to try and explore or make relevant some of my learnings to what is going on currently now in Berlin. To understand immigration, one can't only look at the center, Berlin being one example. It's a much larger issue. Tel Aviv, Yafo, is, without getting into details of the Israeli-Palestinian issue, I don't want to bring that up. There's the uniqueness there. But there are some general points to be made. One is that Tel Aviv is very much like the boundary states. If we go around the Mediterranean, what Alexandria used to be, Beirut before the war, Istanbul, Athens, Southern Europe. These are societies that are paused, that exist on the boundaries of Europe. They have an ambivalent attitude towards the center, towards Berlin, London, maybe even Washington, have felt themselves in the past both victims and beneficiaries of Europe. At the same time, face very strong local forces of nationalism, right-wing nationalism, religion, political religion, whether it's Judaism or Islam. So the situation in Tel Aviv might be compared to the situation in Greece, in Turkey, and other societies. Nonetheless, some of the issues, I think, from what I hear, are quite relevant to you. So I will be taking a bottoms-up approach, as opposed to a top-down approach, which has its place. I work at Tel Aviv University. I'm a teacher there. And about 6-7 years ago, being quite desperate with the realities in my society, and feeling that the university is very much like a planet poised above the realities on the ground, with people who have more interest in Europe than in the streets outside the university, I decided to see what could happen outside the university and how to make the university more relevant through my own experience. I got involved in the situation, among other things, of Palestinians in Israel, but from our point of view today, with the influx of outsiders, foreigners, refugees, asylum seekers, infiltrators, whatever we want to call them, into our society and the strong impact they have. Before I get into details of my activities, let me give you an overview of the realities we face. Tel Aviv, like Istanbul, has a European wing and a Middle Eastern wing. The Middle Eastern includes Israelis of different persuasion, whether Arab or Jewish, but all with a more Middle Eastern traditional background. It's also a class issue. South Tel Aviv is a neighborhood that represents Israel's Middle Eastern orientation, both on the Arab and Jewish side. It also represents lower class or working class people who see the north of Tel Aviv as a European-oriented, global, discriminating society, and they see the university as a representative of that. And they also see nice left-wing philanthropic organizations as representatives of that, as opposed to the realities on the ground. So South Tel Aviv is a neighborhood which is on the boundary between Arab and Jewish Tel Aviv Yafo. It's also historically, before the refugees came, before the outsiders came, an area which is dominated by people from Middle Eastern background, working class background, more religious, more traditional, feeling themselves oppressed by internal forces in the society. So there's a class issue there. Outsiders began to show up in those neighborhoods in the 60s and 70s. First, what you would call Gastarbeit. Workers invited in to come and work, pretty much some from Western Africa, some from the Philippines, some from Eastern Europe, some from Georgia. People were brought in legally to work, and also many illegal workers who came to work, because Israel is on the boundary. It has a land boundary with what you might call the second or third world. It's quite easy to get there. The government's orientation has been to allow foreign work, but not to encourage integration. That's a fundamental principle, not unlike other parts of Southern Europe and the eastern edges of the European Empire. Not to encourage integration, to make use of the people and send them back. However, we know that if there's one law in sociology, it is that foreign workers do not go home. They don't. They have children, the children stay, they learn the language, they struggle, they fight, they take places in the margin of society, but they stay. So we had a growing community of foreigners who were both legal or illegal without getting into details. And when people are in the gray area of the society, where do they move to? Where can they find housing? In the poor neighborhoods of the cities they live in, around the central bus stations, where oppressed communities live, where people don't have the right to say no, or where people are warmer and more open, and the rents are cheap. So from the 70s and 80s, we began to see a growing community of foreigners, work-oriented foreigners from Asia and Africa, beginning to make a position for themselves in South Tel Aviv. Having kids, opening churches, opening mosques, entering the labor market at the bottom, not being fully protected by the law, being outside the law, creating at once a vibrant atmosphere, at the same time social problems that go along with poverty and exclusion. The local residents, for the most part Jewish but also Arab, in the beginning saw opportunity, but slowly began to see their neighborhoods change. They began to see different languages, different religions, rents going down or up, crime in the streets, social problems, strangeness, and began to develop resistance. Very important point, because these are the people who are also prey to right-wing ideologies. So we began to see the emergence of these communities, of people outside society. Later on, in the 90s, we began to see an influx of refugees. In our case, people who came through Egypt, through the Sinai Desert, and entered Israel illegally, so to speak, from two countries, Sudan and Eritrea. Two African countries which face incredible local problems. Without getting into details, Eritrea went through a revolution, created a police state. People who leave Eritrea are protected by the United Nations Refugee Convention and cannot be deported, and then began to show up in Tel Aviv. Where do they go? They get on a bus and go to South Tel Aviv, where the outsiders live. In fact, almost directed there by the state. Sudan is a different story. There's a civil war there, or war of genocide, any way you want to look at it, between the northern Arab Islamic-oriented part and the southern or western part, which is Darfurim, which has a stronger African identity, although it is Arab-speaking and Muslim. Without getting into problems, those people are also protected. So we had the emergence of foreigners coming from Eritrea and Sudan who cannot be deported, but whom the state does not want to integrate. Entering the bottom part of the gray area of the labor market and being directed consciously or unconsciously to the places where they live. South Tel Aviv. Go there, get off, find a place, work illegally. We're not going to allow you to work, but if you do work, we might or might not arrest you. This was a situation I found myself in. Large, growing communities with problems between them. Eritreans with problems around their own politics at home. Sudanese with politics between North and South. Tensions between Africans and Asians, between different kinds of Western African countries. Not cohesive communities. Sharing one thing, which is some kind of oppression. And sharing one thing, which is exclusion and lack of recognition by the state. And generating increasing resistance from the local people who felt that this was just another way of oppressing them, the local residents. The middle class people up north, the universities, the government, they send them here. Why don't they take them into their neighborhoods? Why are they sending their kids to work with them here? What's going on here? Get them out of here. Take them into your neighborhoods. That was the attitude. This is a foundation of many of the issues that I'll be talking about in the future. So I went down there. I myself was born in those neighborhoods, so I had some kind of feeling for that place. And I decided to get involved in the issues of children who were born there, the kind of social problems one encounters. Not as a researcher, because I had enough of writing about things. I wanted to do things without writing about them, or not for the purpose of writing about them. And wandering around the neighborhoods, I was invited by a social work organization. One of the few small social workers, partly funded by the state, 3 social workers to deal with 40,000 problems. But like many social workers, with a good orientation, good attitude, trying to do something with limited resources, but with a very social work orientation, which is, you are a problem, and we have the solution. And what those organizations do, first of all, they start with the people really on the bottom. That means people with violence at home, with kids with problems, with all the issues you can imagine in not only poverty, but lack of political rights. Every now and then they try to work with what they call the leaders of the community, with the idea that if you work with the leaders, you have access to the rest of the community. So they created a workshop for leaders from across the spectrum of outsiders. And they gave them a leadership training class, very nice one. It looked a little bit like high-tech, decision-making, time management, motivation, kind of generic organizational theory. And after they met once a week for an hour or 2 in the evening after 14 hours of hard work. Most of them would be working illegally and cleaning in the back rooms of restaurants and hotels and those kind of places. They'd come at night, and ever since, at least they're doing something. After a while, one of them said to the leader of the group, "This is wonderful, but we're leaders and we don't know where we are. Time management is not the issue, and not decision making. We need to know the principles of our society in order to understand who to fight, or how to fight, or why to fight. We lost." And at that point, the leader, having met me, asked me to come in and give a lecture. So I said, sure, that's a way to learn. I'll come in and answer your questions. And when I came to meet 15 people from Eritrea, Sudan, Philippines, Burma, Mongolia, Nigeria, Congo, you can imagine, all outsiders, all partly legal or somewhat gray areas, all working very hard, all maybe single families facing deportation, the beginning of legal standing through their children, a mess, with some street-level Hebrew, but very little understanding of the bigger picture of our society. And I said, what do you want to know? They said, we want to know everything. Culture, history, politics, international relations, about Israel, the Jewish people, the Palestinian people. Tell us everything you know. I said, well, we have an hour and a half. I don't know how far we can get, but let's start. And we started talking. And I started a long time ago, the destruction of the Second Temple, a long time ago, to give a feeling of the development of history. That's what my intuition. And after an hour and a half, we reached the Middle Ages. But they said, come back next week, this is interesting. And for me, this was a powerful experience because the first time in many years, I felt that I was doing my work as a professor. I was speaking to people who wanted to study, not people looking at their cell phones while I speak. And the next week I came back, we took it from the Middle Ages to 1948, the establishment of the State of Israel, the Nakba, the problems. And then they said, come back next week. So I sort of took over the class and realized that here's something interesting happened. People who live everyday reality, they encounter the fragments of life in a very powerful way. The boot is on them, but they don't know what's above it. They don't have or they have alternative frameworks of putting it in some kind of perspective. So we were thinking together, 1948, the establishment of the State of Israel, the expulsion of the Palestinians, the incoming of Israeli Jewish immigrants, the creation of politics, the law of return, the fundamentals of citizenship, the Labour Party, the Likud, the right wing, the Ministry of the Interior, which is a big, big name. And after that, there was some sense that we had accomplished something, but very little. I felt I had done my work. I didn't know how to proceed. I felt quite depressed, saying this is just the tip of an iceberg, but something interesting happened here, and I went home. Next week, I got a phone call saying, why don't you come to a goodbye party? They want to celebrate the end of the course. It was very interesting. So I said, sure. And I went to one of, I don't want to get the details of Tel Aviv, one old building with the ground floor was an illegal textile manufacturer from Gaza. The second floor was, a house of prostitution. The third was an illegal daycare center where kids are kept in bed all day. The fourth was a church, an African church. I entered, It's a room as twice the size of this, with a big flag of Congo and Israel on the back, with not 15 people sitting there, but 200 people on white chairs like yourself. The people are recognized, and their family and their children. And in front was like a gospel band, and a pastor, a Christian pastor from Congo giving a Christian speech. And in front there was a little table. On the table there was certificates which said on them, graduated with distinction from the leadership training program, signed Professor Gideon Kunda, Tel Aviv University. So this reminds me of Tel Aviv University, with a difference. I said, give a speech. So I stood up and said something. And afterwards they came one by one, got on the stage, shook my hand, took pictures, and left. And now that's shocking. That was shocking. I'm an anthropologist, and I discovered that when you do work, the most interesting thing is a puzzle you don't understand or surprise, requires interpretation. Something happened there. And I went home that night and said, what's going on here? What is this? Not what I expected. I expected to sit around and eat sunflower seeds and drink coffee and say, life is rough, and go home, back to Tel Aviv University. And in the evening it occurred to me, and this was an insight 6 years ago that has stayed with me since, that this is an opportunity, that in fact people tell you what they want, and they organize. And in fact what they did, was my interpretation at the time, they created the university. The content was my lecture about Israeli society, for what it's worth. But the ritual form was a ceremony which is exactly like, they invented a ceremony which is like maybe in Lagos or in Kinshasa, I don't know where, but Tel Aviv, a ritual representing learning. And I said to the people who organized the next day, people organized the group, I said, why don't we try, I'm going to take time off from the university, this is very important to me. Let's continue the group and offer to them an opportunity to follow through with this idea, to create a university, so to speak, a place where people can learn. Because this is what they're telling us. They want to learn, they need to learn. Knowledge is important. One person came to me and said, the next day said, you know, in the park where we are, there's nice people coming from North Tel Aviv with soup. It's called a soup kitchen. They give out food. It's very nice because people are hungry. And they just came from horrible places. But it's also humiliating to get handouts. Food, I can find in the garbage. I don't need you for that. But where can one learn? Because learning is to be human. So that was the organizing motto. And we started meeting with this group. And the idea was to use this group as a leadership group, but now to also create a learning environment managed by the people in the group. That was a very important point. There was some input from me, obviously, but I'm a privileged citizen. I come from the outside, I don't understand. I try to understand, I'm empathetic, but there's a power inequality. But the group who experience themselves as outsiders, as weak, tried to take over and create a university. And we started meeting. I joined the group, but these were 15 people from all over the world meeting at night after 15 hours of work. And they went out to communities and said, what do you want to study? And they came back and said they want to study Hebrew, not because it's the language of the Bible, because that's the language of survival. It's theirs too. They live. They need the Hebrew to speak to the teachers of their kids. The kids only speak Hebrew. And they want to learn computers. Okay. So we went out and found 15 computers from some high-tech company, computer garbage, and we advertised the class, and they decided to have the class at 7 o'clock in the evening on Tuesday night in the church. Completely illegal. And they decided that people are going to pay 100 shekel, which is about 20 euros, because we need the money to pay the pastor to rent his church. Also illegal. And they advertised the class, and we had to find a teacher. So I found my daughter, who was 23 at the time. She could manage IBM if IBM knew that, but IBM doesn't recognize her skills, but she can teach. And she decided to volunteer to teach. And we advertised this class in basic computers in the church Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock with 20 computers. At 7 o'clock on Tuesday, there were 300 people outside standing in a long line. And it turns out not only women with children, and not only men with children without children, and not only people who don't know computers and want to learn double click, there were people who wanted to learn HTML, except their documents were burnt on the way from Asmara. And we started learning. We started teaching. And it turned into a party. People were very depressed. You know, depression is energy or anger internalized and turned against yourself. That's depression. And somehow it was released. Suddenly there's a horizon. There's some kind of future, even if it's next week. There's some kind of opportunity, even if it's not realistic. But it turned into a party and gave us a feeling this is worthwhile. And from that foundation, the organization sprang with the underlying principles. A, it's organized by the community, with representatives of the community. There are people like myself who are participants who try and create an equal environment internally, even though it's not equal. Israeli volunteers, charging money for the classes, working in the church, working illegally, under the radar of the legal system. And we built a model which developed from semester to semester, 3 months classes in Hebrew, in English where people want to live, in computers, in child psychology of a Western sort, Erikson and Piaget, to contrast to the child beliefs people brought. Among the daycare teachers, journalism, sewing, Israeli and Jewish history, Arabic. Each semester the classes grew and the organization got to be very well established, although it was completely illegal. It wasn't an NGO, it wasn't registered. The money was under my mattress. But it took over, and the fundamental principle that it's managed by the community, there's support from outside with an effort to recognize power inequality and to step back from that and not to do the natural thing, which is to say, you know what, I know better, because I do. I understand the society. I have more access. You're making mistakes. It's very tricky to live in that environment. At the same time, to face the fact that there's problems, and let's not undermine them or not ignore them. It's not like people come from a different culture. What happens when people say, we can come, but we don't want our women to come here? What do you say? That's their choice. Can I accept that? I don't want my daughter to be treated that way. Do I have to respect that? Or there's tensions between Eritreans who support the government against the government. They want to kill each other. They don't want them. Or there's tensions between Asian women and African men. So it turns out that that's what happened there. When you empower, as it turns out, people take power. And you lose power. And things happen which you like and don't like. So empowerment sounds easy on paper, but in reality it's an ongoing struggle and a very painful one. And one is constantly forced to look at oneself to say, where's my bias? What can I live with? How much can I tolerate? When do I challenge? When do I challenge without being paternalistic? And somehow, with a lot of work, this organization grew. And we moved from the church. We rented a space in the bus station. Bus station's an old building, it's collapsing, and there's no buses there, and it's just a big mess. But they're renting out cheap rooms. So we created a computer room with some money from the United Nations. And we can teach video editing. We got some sewing machines, and we can create a sewing class, which is not such a sewing class, but it's a basis for a social company that might try and make money for Filipino women and Sudanese men who have sewing skills. The organization grew and established a presence in the community. And slowly we formalized. And we added a section for kids, because kids study in Israeli schools, they learn Hebrew, they become Israeli. As soon as the schools are very nice, but as soon as they step out of school, they encounter horrible problems. The parents working till 12 o'clock at night, so we created the Center for Kids. We created the theater, where Sudanese actors enacted the reality of life in Sudan, the escape to Egypt, the massacres in Egypt, crossing the torture boundaries of Sinai and entering Israel and encountering a secondary trauma over there, and then showing it to Israeli audiences. Of course, the next step was that this organization became very politicized and under a lot of attack from the outside, from the right wing, from the local residents. And the local residents encountered me in the street and said, excuse me, this is what they said, who the fuck are you? What right do you have to come here? This used to be our neighborhood. There's only 20% Jewish people left here. Where there's a synagogue, now there's a mosque. Why don't you take them to your home? Why do you come and teach kids, their kids, music, and our kids don't have music? Get out of here. Some of them, openly, some of them closed, some of them religious, some of them right-wing, some of them became right-wing, neo-fascist activists. But I realized that what the most important thing is to recognize that these are not just neo-Nazis, that there's a social foundation for their concerns that needs to be addressed. We need to understand, and need to empathize, and need to find connections with those communities too. Otherwise, we're going to see what we see in Greece, the new dawn, 20% in parliament, these are Nazis. And the rise of the right wing in Europe, I don't want to make comparisons, but this is happening. It's happening under your noses, outside Berlin and inside Berlin. And the nice openness now is just the first step. Things are going to get worse before they get better. And I realized the crucial importance of not only working with the refugees, but working with the neighbors and reaching out to organizations and being spat upon or finding connections and saying, do you want to send your kids here? Do you want a class in Hebrew? Do you want a separate class? What can I do? Okay. Is there anything I can do? Can we open a legal council for you here in the city? Can I establish connections with some local organizations that have a progressive point of view? And in fact, we made an alliance with one organization, a Jewish Middle Eastern organization that believed that they are a rainbow and that all these people are part of the rainbow, although they get a lot of criticism from the rest of the community. And then reaching out to Jaffa, where the Israeli Palestinians live, and asking them to take responsibility too, or to volunteer. But it turns out there's problems. There's a huge tension between Palestinian Arabs and Darfurian refugees because of what goes on in Darfur. And there's a huge tension between Palestinian Israelis and Jewish Israelis. The effort was to reach out and try and create an organization that allowed all the elements of society to be enacted within the organization and to deal with them no matter how painful and no matter how many crises we faced. It would have been easy to focus only on the refugees and say, look how nice we are. But in many ways that would make things worse, not better. It would be easy to decide for them, say, look, come learn our music, come learn our language, come, we like you, we want to integrate you. But you have rights too. The fact that you came here doesn't mean that we have to change you. It means you are going to change us too. How do we have to change? How do we have to change? How do we approach our own community? Say, you know what? Jewish Israelis need to learn Arabic. Excuse us. Or we need to examine the foundations of citizenship in our society. Not only people who were born Jewish. People who speak Hebrew. That's a different... Now, we could translate into somebody's being sent to get me off the stage. How much time do I have? Sorry. There's no clock here. I don't know. This is Germany. What? 2 hours? 2 minutes. Okay. So to wind it up, the organization is continuing. It's growing. We have 250 students. We became an NGO. We hired citizens to work, but we're also hiring refugees to work. We introduced the outsiders as legitimate parts of the NGO, which is not something one takes for granted. They have the vote too. It's not just an organization for them. It's their organization, which created a lot of problems too. But ultimately, it's a thriving organization. It's alive. It goes on from semester to semester. We're facing all the problems of our society, which I won't even get into, but we are reaching out to the other residents of the neighborhood, recognizing the crucial importance of building bridges and legitimizing the concerns of working class people who legitimately claim that they might get hurt, that something's happening to their culture, that things are not simple, that what they say, we are the garbage can for your concerns. And until we don't address those issues without saying they are born Nazis, nobody's born a Nazi, I don't think so. Some people might be. Nobody's born right-wing. These things grow out of some kind of social reality. And even if some people have right-wing tendencies, people who don't are pushed to support them. That is a crucial point, to find those people, to see diversity in the communities that are opposing immigration, to be aware of some of their concerns, and to try and address them and build bridges between communities that have a shared interest, but which the government has an interest in forcing against each other. So that is our current situation. I've taken now on the role of helping this organization grow, but stepping back from everyday teaching, which I like, but trying to use this as a foundation for addressing my own society. So bringing in my students there, say, you don't have to go to libraries. You've read enough European social theory. Go to the neighborhoods, find a way to be there, write about what you saw, what you think and what you feel, and that's your seminar paper. And people tell me, that's not academic. I say, you're wrong, that's academic. That is academic. Once you've done that and tell me what you think and feel about this, then you can go and read as much as Foucault or whatever as you like. Giving lectures to policemen, to right-wing organizations, to the Supreme Court, to bus drivers, showing them the history of the place and teaching them. I was told to stop right now. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay, we stop. I do think there is relevance to the situation you're facing, because it seems to me that Germany is in the first stages of the euphoria of 1 million people entering, and in some sense it's very admirable what's happening. It's unusual. But Germany is on the edge, on one progressive edge. The rest of the world is somewhere else, and my prediction is things are going to get more difficult. You're going to see more and more resistance. You're going to see more and more social problems. And it's possible that the constitutional efforts from above are significant, but the bottom is what's important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gideon Kunda. So, due to some time restrictions, we would kindly ask you probably to ask one question, and afterwards Gideon will be also You're staying here, right? Okay, great. So you can approach him and talk to him. So, is there a question?
Thank you. And thanks for your speech. I think just from my side, the most outcome of your speech is that you share your experience you already had. So my question is first, what is the name of your organization again? And is there a way or space where you can share, or your organization share your experience more in detail maybe, because I think it's need more time than 20 minutes.
I'd be happy to share with you offline, but the name of the organization is the Community Education Center, the CEC. It's now joined another organization called the Levinsky Library, the Levinsky name of the park, but it's either Levinsky Library or the Community Education Center. And we have a website and we have material, and I'd be happy to share those through Shai or through yourself. And there certainly is a lot of learning, I think, or mutual learning from that experience. CEC, Community Education Center. That was the name the people chose. And now it joined a larger NGO, which is called the Levinsky Library. Levinsky is the name of the park where this all happens. And it's actually a bomb shelter given us by Tel Aviv municipality, and a lot of activities take place in the Levinsky Bomb Center. Except there's no bombs there in the meanwhile, except social bombs. Yeah.
And the center that Gideon is working on is tagged on the Get Engaged Facebook page. When you scroll down to his picture where we introduced him as a speaker, you will find the direct link to the center. Cool.
Gideon, thank you very much for being here. Thank you. Gideon Kunda.